Most of you stayed, so it meant you enjoyed the play, right? And I'll bet anything it caught up with you. You might have thought at the beginning, oh, this seems just sort of ordinary or old-fashioned, and then it sneaks up on you. And at the end, I was teary-eyed. Wasn't that a lovely scene? And of course, that's implicit in the whole show. It builds to that beautiful ending. So Kelly is filled with surprises. You think he's writing one thing, but yet it's something else, and it has levels to it, and it's so complex. I want to start by sharing with you an afternoon I had with George Kelly in Sun City, California, January 24th, 1971. I had just got my PhD from Columbia, and I had chosen George Kelly as my first project because of Mary McCarthy's essay in Partisan Review, in which she had the most wonderful sentence. It seems as if George Kelly's plays on the surface are like every play you've ever seen or read, but actually they're unlike anything you've ever seen or read. I thought, how intriguing, and I started to read them, and I quite agreed with her, and I said, I want this to be my first postdoctoral project. Nobody's written about him. He'd more or less been forgotten then. And I did get his address, I think from Samuel French, in Sun City, and he wrote back inviting me to come to visit him. So I drove out there from Los Angeles. It's near Redlands, and a man answered the door wearing an apron. And I thought, now, was this Mr. Kelly? It didn't look like pictures I'd seen, but it turned out not to be. I'll talk about him in a minute. And then the man ushered me into the library, where an 84-year-old man was sitting ramrod straight, extraordinarily handsome, perfect features, perfect profile. And he began speaking in a voice that they don't make anymore, and they didn't make back then, so cultivated, with such perfect diction and such good manners, and he invited me to sit down. Our first moment, I got nervous because he said, are you here from Redlands to ask me to come and talk to a class? Because he did that. He did go out and talk to drama students. And I said, no, Mr. Kelly, I'm writing a book about you and your work. And I'll never forget his expression. And the hand to the mouth almost meant, well, you can't and you mustn't say things. And I thought, well, this is going to be about 5 minutes. And then he backed off from that. He was actually taken by surprise. Who would want to write about him? But he also didn't want to be written about for reasons I will share with you. And I stayed there, as it turned out, for 4 hours. From 1 to 5. He said a lot. I wish I was a kid just out of graduate school. I didn't tape it. How I would love to be able to play portions of that to you now. I hear his voice, but you can't. I didn't tape it. I took notes, and a lot of the notes are in the book. I wish I taped it. I was there for over 4 hours. I was not offered a cup of water, a cup of coffee, a peanut, a crumb, a morsel, not one thing. The man offered me nothing. He talked a lot. He was getting dry, by the way. I was offered nothing. I think what I'm going to tell you about that interview will illuminate the play that you've just seen. Things that he said and did during that afternoon, for me, illuminated all the work, and more now that over 40 years have gone by. At one point in the interview, there was a woman outside the window, and his drape was up so we could see outside, and she was riding a bicycle wearing slacks, and he was horrified. He said, can you imagine the standards have slipped so much that a woman would be wearing slacks? I said he was not of our time. That was 1971. He's really not of our time now. This was an old-fashioned fuddy-duddy to the nth degree. And then he kept saying throughout the afternoon, there was a picture on his desk. He said, many times, my niece Grace. His niece, of course, was Grace Kelly. He never referred to her as Princess Grace. She was always my niece Grace. And the picture was not of Princess Grace, but Grace Kelly about the time that she appeared in George Kelly's Torchbearers at Bucks County Playhouse in 1949. And he said she was a lovely stage actress. He didn't say much about her film work. He said she was a lovely stage actress. He was very proud of her. I gave him a picture of Judith Anderson because I knew that in Medea, I knew that Judith Anderson was his favorite performance. Judith Anderson starred in a play of his called Behold the Bridegroom, which as far as I know has never been revived. That's his favorite play and his favorite performance for reasons I'll tell you. And he looked at the picture of her in Medea and he said she should have stuck to that. You know, she's playing Hamlet now, which she was at that time. And he said, that's a stunt. The part was written for a man, not for a woman. Are themes emerging here? He said, it was so enticing, he said, I have 4 unpublished, unproduced plays in the next room. And I thought, is he going to give me them or let me read them? And I'm going to be able to take these to New York and we're going to produce George Kelly plays. He said, nothing doing. He said, they cannot be cast in today's theater. And I'm sure he meant that the sense of style that he thought was important on the stage and the sense of grandeur absolutely couldn't be cast. I'm sure he thought every player on the stage in 1970 was far too common and vulgar to touch his work. The man was a snob. There's no question of it. He was a snob. He also was very ministerial in his manner. Unbending. I'm not going to say he was friendly or gracious. He really wasn't. He was not friendly. He saw that I was serious. I'll say that about him and about me. He saw that I had a serious intent, that I admired his work, but he was not about to befriend me. And he wasn't about to give me a cup of water. There was something very ministerial, and I could feel it coming through in the play today. He thought that theater was a calling, and that to have talent was to be in a sort of state of grace, and not to have talent was to commit a sin. He was a Puritan. He was also an ardent Catholic, raised as a Catholic, and he very much believed in A, identifying sinners, and B, punishing them. Now, part of what makes this very complicated and part of what makes my book incomplete because of who I was in 1971 and what the culture was like and what Mr. Kelly was. Mr. Kelly, George Kelly, was gay. The man who came to the door in an apron was William Weagley, who was his partner of 50 years. But Mr. Kelly, coming from a right-wing, if not reactionary, Philadelphia family, the Kellys, never told his family that he was gay, always introducing Mr. Weagley as the butler or his valet his entire life. When he got ill, a couple of years after I saw him, and went back to die in Pennsylvania, Weagley didn't come with him. And at the funeral, the Kelly family did not allow Weagley to attend.
So they guessed.
Did not. They found out. They obviously found out. And I believe there was even some contention between Weagley and the estate for the money between the family and the partner. Different times, Kelly did not want to talk about his homosexuality. He couldn't talk about it. He wouldn't talk about it. That's what this gesture I realized was, you can't talk about it. And in the book, I didn't talk about it because I wrote the book when he was still alive. It was published shortly after he died. But I wonder, 40 years ago, if I would have had the courage to write about that anyway. That might have seemed like gossip. It's not gossip. It went to the core of who he was. It's essential to his vision of the world, and I think you can feel it in the play. He was not a romantic. He was not sentimental, And the two charming scenes between Philip and Cynthia in this play that you've just seen are as romantic as Kelly could get. That's as far as he could go. And I think in this charming production, the actors were a little more physically expressive, touching each other, than Kelly would ever have permitted. He was a very strict man, and he was quite preacher-like, ministerial in his behavior. Also true, full confession, I had been told before going to see him that there were rumors he was an anti-Semite. Nothing overtly happened, but I wouldn't question that. I suspect that there might have been something like that. I sent him a picture of Sarah Bernhardt when she was in vaudeville to thank him for the interview, and he wrote back, "Dear Mr. Hirsch." And this may just be me, but I thought Hirsch, Kirsch, he must have thought all Jewish names are alike. And I wondered, did he not offer me a cup of coffee because he knew I was Jewish? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. It occurred to me, I think he wouldn't have offered me the coffee anyway. I'm going to tell you the two essential lines in Kelly's plays, not in this play, that made me think, well, that's who I got to meet that afternoon. One line in a play called Maggie the Magnificent, the doorbell rings and a crabby old woman comes down the stairs and she said, "What in the world do people want to visit other people for?" That line came from his core. That line came from that man's core being. And the other line in Reflected Glory, a maid, and he loved maids, there were maids in all his shows, says, "There's nothing in God's world as wonderful as going home to your own room and knowing that there's going to be nobody there to meet you." That's George Kelly. Now this play, to situate the play in his career, this is 1931. He'd had huge successes on Broadway with The Torchbearers, which is a satire of the Little Theater movement, with The Show Off, which is his masterpiece, a great play. And I was talking to this gentleman. How many of you are old enough, I certainly am, to have seen it when it was done at the Phoenix Theater, APA, on Broadway with Helen Hayes as Mrs. Fisher? It's one of the greatest performances I've ever seen. Helen Hayes as Mrs. Fisher. The richness of that part, and Helen Hayes got it all. She didn't play it sentimental. You can't play Kelly sentimental, because there's a bitter, acrid undertone in Kelly. And then his Pulitzer Prize winner, Craig's Wife, about an obsessive housekeeper. I did ask him, Mr. Kelly, what did you think of Joan Crawford's performance as Harriet Craig in the film of Mrs. Craig? He just raised his eyebrows. Not a word. But it was eloquent. He didn't have to say anything. Kelly, devastatingly handsome at 84, started as an actor. He was an actor. He did national tours, and then he went into vaudeville and he wrote plays for himself in vaudeville. And he said to me very proudly, when I was in vaudeville, it was high-class entertainment. Sarah Bernhardt toured in vaudeville. True, that's why I gave him a picture of Sarah Bernhardt, and he said, "Thank you, dear Mr. Hirsch." He said vaudeville was not smutty, it was not burlesque, it was high-class entertainment. And then after he toured in vaudeville, he went legit by going onto Broadway, had these 3 hits, but he didn't want to continue writing popular plays, and in fact thought of himself as a message playwright. Philip Goes Forth has a message, and he meant it. If you don't have the goods, don't try it, stay home, which was not a very friendly thing to say. In other words, there's nothing to be gained by letting it out and experimenting. Philip didn't have it. There's this one delicious line in the play when Philip talks about the rhythm of the language, and he said that the musical quality. Could you hear that in Kelly's writing? there's a distinctive rhythm in Kelly's plays which no other writer has. And as I was rereading my book the other day to prepare for talking to you today, I thought, wait a minute, this doesn't sound like me. The sentences don't have my syntax and structure, too many semicolons and too many dashes, and I realized that consciously or not, I had begun in my work, my writing, to evoke Kelly's own rhythms and patterns. I had absorbed them because they're so distinctive. You could say that Philip Goes Forth is the sort of anti-poetics. It's how Kelly felt a play should not be written. Not this play, but the kind of plays that poor Philip and Mr. Schronk were working on. Anathema to Kelly. Kelly had no education. He was what is called privately educated. Who knows what that meant? He was educated in the theater. Everything he learned about the theater, he learned on the job. He thought going to school to learn how to write a play or learn how to act was absurd and counterproductive. And through the character of Schronk, he was trying to satirize that kind of academic approach to the theater. He thought talent was instinctive and inborn. Nobody could teach you. It could be trained, not in a classroom, but on the stage itself. He felt Philip didn't have it, and he wrote the play. He told me so as a warning to all the Philips of the land. To somebody who took theater as seriously as George Kelly did, all these untalented playwrights coming to New York were not something to be happy about. They needed to be warned, don't come. I say, not very gracious, but remember, here's a man who didn't give me a cup of water in 4 hours. I mean, Grace may not have been was the name of his niece, but it wasn't a particular quality to describe him. Interesting for Kelly as a director, if anybody heard what he said to me or believed or followed what he did, totally anathema as to current days. He said, I would give actors line readings. I would have a metronome on the stage, and they had to do it according to the beat. That the actors got their laughs because I knew exactly when they would come from my work in vaudeville. Everything was timed down to the second, and you had to, if you missed that second, you missed your laugh. Everything was done to a metronome, repeated and repeated. There was no discussion of psychology. You did what Mr. Kelly told you to do. He directed all of his plays. He produced all of his plays. He wouldn't let anybody in his lifetime direct his plays. Moreover, he didn't direct anybody else's plays, though he had lots of offers to do that. He said, how could you get inside another writer's head? Wow. So he was in total control. But it worked. There's a maid in all of his plays. That maid was answering the phone, as she does in the first scene in this play, and opening doors and serving glasses of water in his first play and in his last. And it was always played by the same actress, Mary Gilday. And Kelly said she was terrified of me. She wouldn't blink an eye unless I told her to. And I think that's exactly the kind of actor he wanted. He only once had problems with an actor when he cast Tallulah Bankhead in Reflected Glory playing a temperamental actress. He said she was very good, but it was difficult because she had her own ideas and he didn't want to hear about them. He wanted her to do what he wanted her to do. The play that he's proudest of, Behold the Bridegroom, which is never done, Judith Anderson, and he said, it's my play about punishing what he calls a hussy of the high world. A woman from a wealthy family who has been very promiscuous, and by the end of the play, he has her dead. And that kind of punishment for sinners, I feel I can say now, is something Kelly lived with inside all those years for being a gay man in a family that wouldn't accept it. I don't think he could completely accept it, but on the other hand, he had a partner for 50 years. So at some level, he did accept it. But I think that sense of the Puritan zeal, this finding sin and punishing it. Philip is sinful, charming, but for him to have gone forward, being a lousy playwright, for Kelly would have been an act of sin, and he wants to save him. So Kelly was very much a Puritan savior. Find the sinner, call it out, and punish it. And I think it was a metaphor for the problems that he lived with his entire life at a time when he had no outlet, although I can't imagine George Kelly going into therapy, to work things out. So he remained this sort of hidden man for all these years. And he said to me, you know, playwriting should be impersonal. The irony is that his plays are deeply personal. They may seem like everybody else's plays. They are only George Kelly's plays. Nobody else in the world could have written the play you've just seen, taking the attitudes and the points of view that you've just seen expressed. His plays are really hard to do because there's this delicate balance between drama and comedy. Rereading the book, I said, I think it was foolish, but I was a kid, that the suicide of Haynes in the play was a mistake. No, it works. You need it there because the stakes are high. This play is about something, and they're huge stakes. This young man's entire life is on the line. And look what could happen if it goes wrong. Kelly talked to me about two of the characters in the play. He said, La Creole, he was criticized at the time in reviews for the character, saying that the character really was an artist, that she was the real thing. He said, I knew a character exactly like that, and she was a true poet. And the character of Schronk, you could tell by the name that it's not a character he's going to respect very much. And he said, I knew somebody like that. He was a little fatty. And I could see that Kelly disapproved of people who ate too much. I'm sure had I been given something to eat, it would have been real small portions. And he would have watched every morsel I took in. Am I being too hard on him? I think he's a great writer. I'm going to drop some names now. I know Arthur Miller's sister, Joan Copeland. And I don't know if some of you saw Joan Copeland and Marion Seldes in the performance of her life in The Torchbearers some years ago. I think The Roundabout did it. And I got to know Joan Copeland. She said, Arthur said that George Kelly is one of the great unheralded American playwrights. That from Arthur Miller, two writers who couldn't have less in common. But Arthur Miller thought he was one of the great unrecognized American playwrights, and to some extent, that's where he remains. And then Jonathan mentioned that I'm going to be back to talk about The Fatal Weakness for the reading on October 21st, and I'm really doing some homework for you guys, so I'm killing two birds with one stone. I've got to go to California next week, and next Thursday, I'm name dropping, but you'll forgive me because it's pertinent. Next Thursday, I'm taking to lunch in Beverly Hills an actress you've heard of named Eva Marie Saint, and her husband of 63 years. Eva Marie Saint played Mrs. Espenshade in The Fatal Weakness in a highly regarded summer tour that was also televised, and I saw it on television, directed by her husband, and it was magnificent, lovely. And they're going to tell me everything they can remember about the production next lunch next Thursday in Beverly Hills. Then I'm going to bring in and share it with you. But she said on the phone already, that part in The Fatal Weakness was the favorite part I ever had. Here's a woman who won the Academy Award for On the Waterfront. And the part in George Kelly's play was the richest, the most complex part she ever had, because that's what Kelly did. He wrote, it may seem to have been very simple, very complicated, with lots at stake. This play was not well received in 1931, and it ended Kelly's active period in the theater. He withdrew for a while. He went to California. He left New York. Then he came back to do the Tula Bankhead play. But he felt that it had been misinterpreted. Critics, Bosley Crowther in the New York Times in particular, said how unfriendly of him not to welcome young people to the city who bring hope and faith and enthusiasm. Whether or not they have talent, sometimes they do, but they bring something to the city. Very ungenerous of him. And Kelly said, didn't he realize that the part of the play is that Philip doesn't want to write? But I think Bosley Crowther got the point. I don't think Kelly was misunderstood. He really didn't want to encourage people who didn't have the goods. He didn't want to encourage people who weren't the real thing. Even critics who didn't like the play recognized that Kelly was too talented and too secure in his gifts to be hoisted by his own petard. What if he was the fake? No, this play that you just saw is the real thing by an artist who has the goods. A man, I think, in many ways tormented, though on the surface, he was one of the most composed human beings I've ever met. The calmness and the serenity were overwhelming. He barely moved for 4 hours. He talked a lot, but the body posture remained absolutely rigid. Almost no smiles. I wouldn't say he smiled. A very serious man about the theater, but an extraordinary figure in American drama. Nobody else like George Kelly. And I think it's courageous and important that Jonathan and the Mint Theater have resurrected Kelly, that they're going to do another play, because he deserves the recognition. I was a little nervous about seeing the play. I hadn't ever seen it. I loved reading it, but they caught the rhythm of it, and I feel that, as I've said, that you're here to listen to me talk about Kelly as a tribute to that something in the play got you, and it does get to one. Kelly is deceptive. Hearing the play once or reading the play once, you may feel something's missing, or you may think, oh, well, this is just sort of standard or superficial. One goes back to Kelly over and over again, and you're never through with him. After seeing this and rereading my book, I wish I could write the book over again, but I'm not going to, but I want to go back to him because there's such richness there that you may think it's too simple, or it's not poetic enough or lyrical enough, but there's such a powerful voice there, and there's so much at stake, but it's disguised. One goes back to Kelly over and over again. I think he's my favorite American playwright. I love him. I wish I had recorded that moment, and I'm glad he didn't give me anything to eat or drink, because I think it does. It made me, I feel I know him better as a result of that.